Do something where it's going to go bad, where you know that ahead of time. Because like, what's the worst that can happen?
You have to try a lot of things. Most things will fail, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. That just means that idea failed. And what can you learn from that idea and then move forward?
The very concepts of success and failure, I think, are words that never really meant anything. And I strongly suspect they have a lot to do with privilege. I often get questions from young students, and they say, well, how did you become a success? Or another great question these days is, how did you overcome failure? And the funny thing is, I found myself really kind of at a loss, because the very concepts of success and failure, I think, are words that never really meant anything. And I strongly suspect they have a lot to do with privilege. That if you can make yourself in the model of a research professor of 100 years ago, that's defined as a success. And if you do something different, it's defined as a failure. There's never been any time in my life where, even after having received an award or having, been on a television show, I sat back and said, boy, I really feel like a success. It was always wrapped up in feelings of, I should have done something differently. I should have, had a different career path. There's never been a time where I felt like a success. And at the same time, the idea that you ever really fail at something. There are plenty of times that I very nearly failed differential equations in calculus. There were things that I was not very good at, but I eventually got them on, say, the third or fourth try. And the problem was just, staying around and telling yourself that I really want to learn this, and I'm just not going to leave until I do. There wasn't any really true failure either. It was always kind of twisted up with things I was proud of, that I was actually working through and trying to learn. So this idea that at some point in your life, you're going to stop and feel like a success. Yes, I am successful now. I get very, very nervous when people ask me about that, about how did you become a success? I want to sit them down and tell them all the things I screwed up and all the things I did wrong and all the reasons I'm not a success. And at the same time, when anybody calls me a failure, it's like, I want to sit you down and explain why what I'm doing is actually getting your money and your funding for the rest of science. I'm not a failure either. Everything in life is going to be a flow between those two things. Everything is going to be a jumble of success and failure. Your personal life, your professional life, the way you feel about yourself. And it's a strange model we give young people. Try to be a success. Try to overcome failure. All I can do is just kind of breathe and just realize that at no point in my life am I going to separate those two.
So I was maybe a year, 2 years into comedy, went home to this job, came back, and I haven't thought about this in a while. I was overcome by fright. I couldn't get back on stage. I couldn't do it. I would drive from my apartment in West LA, 30 minutes towards the Comedy Store, find parking, get out of my car, walk to the Comedy Store, because you get an employee spot every week, and I was an employee, so you get your 3 minutes, and it was the highlight of your week. And I would park, go in, turn around, get back into my car, and go home without getting on stage. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I didn't know what to do. So what I did was that was going to be the end for me. If I can't go on stage, I can't be a comic, So what I did was I told myself, do something where it's going to go bad, where you know that ahead of time. Because what's the worst that can happen? That kind of thing. So I went to the Comedy Store. I said, I'm not going to say a word. In my head, I'm not going to say anything for my whole time I'm on stage. And I'm just going to see what happens. So I went in, I put my tape recorder down, I pressed record, and then I was and then I just kept looking around, and just 3 minutes of silence. This can't go well. So it's not gonna affect me if it doesn't, because I'm trying to tank it. But then I could get on stage, I could feel what it's like in front of the crowd. I actually got a couple laughs, just off shrugs and stuff and how ridiculous it was. And then after that, I was able to get back on stage again. I was like, that's the worst. I can handle the worst. So now let me go.
I feel that fear is the most powerful emotion that is in the world, and that most of my emotions, other people's emotions, I believe, is governed or influenced by fear. I'm very much inspired by parkour. And I still am a free runner, but I was a really hardcore free runner, like training like 6-7 days a week for 2 years at one point, like a decade ago, 12 years ago in my life. And I basically didn't realize at the time, but me and the people that I trained with were basically completely rewiring our brain. We were learning to understand our own personal triggers for fear and then navigate through that. So say that we were jumping on, a ledge that if we fell, we might break both our legs. But the distance was quite manageable. So what we'd do is we'd start on the ground, then we'd go up a little bit higher, go up a little bit higher. The same distance, but as you go higher, it's not the distance, it's the consequences that scare you. So we learn to master our own fear and develop strategies for moving through fear. And often in life, when we feel fear, we kind of get nervous and we run from it. But really, when you feel fear, it's something new. And probably that's a direction, not all the time, but often that we should be moving towards, to embrace something new. I felt so empowered that it inspired me to change my life, like leave my boyfriend, leave my job, change my flatmate, change my business partner, everything. Because I was like, well, if I can train and I'll jump on this wall and I didn't break my legs, what's the worst that can happen if I split out with my boyfriend and I don't think he's the one, right? And I basically reprogrammed my brain, and then from that I was able to change my whole life and be sitting here with you today. The kind of key is with parkour is that we kind of say, well, you've got to do something 3 times. And that is kind of like quite a common thing when you're trying to master something. Like once is luck, 2, you can do it twice, 3 times, now you've mastered it. And that's because neurologically, it kind of takes the 3 times for your neurons to fire in your brain and to create those new pathways. Then it's like sealed.
If there was one thing that I've learned that I feel whatever good fortune has put me in the position of realizing this, is that without risking looking like an absolute fool, you cannot do anything original, unexpected, anything that comes from your heart. You have to shed that fear of judgment. And that means you may fall on your ass. And one of the wonderful things is that's our job as members of the artistic community. Your job isn't to succeed. Your job is to be one of many people throwing, you're the wind at the door, you're the wave. One wave is going to crash through, and it may be you or it may be somebody else, but there's a lot of waves that are going to add up to somebody breaking through. I mean, do you think people really look, when Linkletter and I first were going around trying to pitch the idea of boyhood, I got an idea, right? We're gonna make a little short film about a little boy for 12 years. We're gonna cut it together, it'll be one movie. It'll be all about childhood, it'll be amazing. So wait, it's coming out in 13 years? And wait, does the little boy sign a contract? You can't sign a contract for more than 7 years. Yeah, but if the boy's having a good time, yeah, so I put my money in now, and if the boy's having a good time, I get it back in 13 years? Yeah, nice. What else do you have? But luckily the guy went with me, and yeah, we could have fallen on our ass, but you have to try. You have to try.
Great breakthroughs in society usually have required multiple tries, multiple experiments, multiple pivots. And that's the whole idea of getting in there, getting some experience, and then taking a step back and figuring out how you move forward. The most classic case of this was the whole idea that John F. Kennedy started about getting somebody into space, landing somebody on the moon. When he said that, he called for the country to rally around that. It almost was impossible for people to imagine that happening. The technology just wasn't there. But people tried things, many times failed. This they thought would work, it didn't work. They kept adjusting, kept at it, and eventually they were successful in landing somebody on the moon and bringing them back home safely. So that's a perfect example of many different experiments. People see this in science, that they know that in order to have a breakthrough in science, you have to try a lot of things. Most things will fail, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. That just means that idea failed. And what can you learn from that idea and then move forward?
In Silicon Valley, there's the fail fast, fail forward, the fetishizing of failure, and it's become very trendy. I think it's extremely misleading and misinterpreted and misapplied in many cases. So whether you ask, say, Peter Thiel, who views failure as always being a tragedy, there is no exception. It is not some aesthetic imperative or learning imperative necessarily. Or you talk to, say, Mark Andreessen, for instance, who I interviewed for the Tim Ferriss show, but also for Tools of Titans. And he says, when I was getting started, I'm paraphrasing here, but when I was getting started, we didn't have a fancy word for it. We just called it a fuck up. We didn't call it a pivot. I think that it would be better to say iterate fast and iterate forward. I certainly feel like doing your homework, coming out, and maybe the Silicon Valley ethos should start looking to the military more. To say, I think it's David Hackworth, I think I'm getting that right, who said, if you find yourself in a fair fight, you didn't prepare properly. Or something along those lines. I mean, it is entirely plausible and possible to come out and just smash your competition from second one of round one. And I think that even if you do end up failing and then correcting course, that's a good aspiration to have. Not to come out really shoddy and handicapped from the get-go, expecting to pivot 27 times. And if you look at my portfolio, for instance, I have about 70 companies I've invested in. I was a pre-seed advisor to Uber, and Uber's business model hasn't really changed. It's been the same for a very long time. If you look at Derek Sivers, the founder of CD Baby, he came up with the business model in about 5 minutes of going to a used record store and asking them how they did it. And it remained the same effectively for 10 years, 15 years, until he sold it for whatever it was, $24 million. So you don't have to fail. It's not a prerequisite for having a successful company or a successful life. You just have to learn. So I think learning and iterating are two words that are going to be more valuable than failure. But when failure does slap you in the face, when fortune serves you up a tidal wave of some type or quicksand, being able to adapt to that and not emotionally overreact, I think, is certainly important, but you shouldn't strive for failure.
Well, the best way to debrief any project, any bad thing that happened, any problem, is just to go down the tiers of why. And so you start with, okay, so let's assume that the project that you were working on is late. Let's assume it's a product release and that it is now definitely not going to make its deadline and it's probably 3 or 6 months late. First of all, it's important just to create an environment where people can talk freely and not feel blamed, because we're just debriefing to understand what happened. So it's about understanding the structure of it, not looking to finger point. But the first question is why? So why was the release late? Well, engineering, for example, didn't deliver the code on time. Why didn't engineering deliver the code on time? Because they weren't given the specs early enough. Why weren't they given the specs early enough? Because product didn't get them to them early enough. Why didn't product get them to them early enough? Because product didn't understand from marketing the requirements early enough. So if you keep going down those and you understand why did marketing not get them early enough, it's because they didn't have a good plan to get the customer data they needed to. Then you can take a look at what went wrong here. Is it about we need to tighten up our process, which is very often true, especially with startups? Is it that we need to have a better time frame for deliverables, which is often very true when you're working on complicated multi-domain projects? Or did we just forecast incorrectly? Did we not take into account all the multiple steps that leads to the product release? And that's often very true as well. And maybe why didn't we take into account the multiple steps? Because there wasn't one person in charge. Great. So going forward, we know that we need to all take into account the multiple steps and declare one person the owner of the project overall. And let's try those two interventions, those two changes, and that's going to help us be more, have more excellence in operations.
Sometimes you do have to call it quits. Sometimes things are just not working. But my own experience is sometimes just when you think that, finally something breaks through and you know, the sky opens up and there's new possibilities. We came very close to not making it with AOL. There was many times where it didn't quite work. We thought something would work, it didn't. We have to lay people off. We were about to run out of money. We had a partnership that fell apart. There were some near-death experiences on that road. And I used to joke that AOL was a 10-year in the making overnight success. By the time it finally got successful, everybody said, you came out of nowhere. No, we didn't. We were at it for a decade. And thankfully, we didn't give up. We didn't quit. We stuck with it. So sometimes you have to just say, it's not working. You have to walk away. But my experience is, if you really believed in that idea early on, you really really were passionate about that idea, you still think it could get traction, for some reason it just hasn't broken through, take a fresh look at what partnerships you can establish that help accelerate the growth. What new policies perhaps can be put in place to accelerate the new growth. Don't give up on it. There's a great Nelson Mandela quote, it always seems impossible until it happens.